Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a ranking video of my favorite Timothy Zahn novels that are not his Star Wars novels. I've read about 16 of his Star Wars novels and about 15 of his non-Star Wars novels. He's become a favorite author for me. I love his work. His science fiction is really entertaining. There are a few of his books that I think are mediocre, but everything else is pretty good. So this is going to be my 9 books in series for him. Now, a bit of a disclaimer. I have 3 of his series on here. 2 of his series I clumped together, put the entire series as one, because I feel so similarly about each of the books in the series that I didn't want to stretch them out and list them individually. I do have one series that he did of 3 books that I did spread out because I feel like one of his books is most excellent, one of them is very good, and then the last one is mediocre. So that one's spread out. But all his other ones are either standalones or they're a series that's clumped together. So why don't I begin with my number 9. My number 9 is Cobra Strike, the second book in the original Cobra series. I apologize that my copy is destroyed. It was kind of like that when I got it. It was falling apart. We had to tape it up and stuff. But this is the second book in the Cobra series. You have Cobra, Cobra Strike, and Cobra Bargain. This is, I think, his most mediocre novel. It feels very derivative of science fiction. It doesn't play up the original parts of this series, but it plays up the parts of science fiction that you've seen a million times, like first contact with a new species, military science fiction tropes, but it doesn't do them well. This was early on in his career. He still hadn't found his footing of what kind of a science fiction writer he was. So this book, I think, is his most mediocre book. I gave it like a flat, it's not a good book. I don't feel positive about it. I don't feel negative about it. I feel it's mediocre. Now let's get into the next is a trilogy. It is the Sibyl's War. I have the books Pawn, Knight, and Queen. These were all released by Tor in the books 2019. I think it was 2017, 2019, and 2020. And this trilogy follows this girl, Nicole, who is basically sucked up into an alien spaceship. And a few of her acquaintances are as well. And she is not happy about it. And so she ends up being one of the few people who can help run the spaceship. And so she's asked to help them run the spaceship. But in part of that, she also starts a war on the spaceship to try to end the way that the people on the spaceship run things. It's a very, very interesting premise. When you read this book, it feels pure Timothy Zahn. The tropes he uses are just Timothy Zahn tropes. The series, I think, is good in that it nails the tropes that it was trying to do, and it has a few moments where it's unique. The concepts of the arena that shows up in this trilogy is interesting. The problem is it's not paced correctly. Books 1 and 2 are pretty slow, and then book 3 just ramps it all up, and it's like, oh, we're done now. And it feels like Timothy Zahn originally planned it out to be a 5-book series. And instead, he had to squish it into a 3-book series because Tor wouldn't let him do a full 5 books. They'd only give him enough contracts for a trilogy. So he shortened it, cut out a lot of the character development, cut out a lot of the big plot, and basically shortened it to be short and sweet. And had he made it a full 5-book series, I think it would have been much better. Instead, it feels rushed, and it feels too small compared to what it should have been. So I think this is it's an entertaining read, but it's not his best. So that's why this is my number 8. And by the way, there's a lot of his books, about 20 of his books I haven't read. So there are books not on this list. Then you have a recent release for him called The Icarus Plot, also published by Bain in hardcover. This book is kind of a sequel follow-up to the Icarus Hunt, the Icarus Plot. Takes place several years later. It's also very self-contained. There are characters from the Icarus Hunt, his original novel, in this book, but overall it feels very different. If you take out some little references, some small character details, some small characters that show up, overall this book is very separated. And you wouldn't necessarily know by the technology used in this book that it was connected. It was an entertaining read. I liked the mystery of it. This is very much a puzzle box book. If you've heard the J.J. Abrams term, this is a puzzle box book. I don't think it handled the puzzle box elements superbly. I think it just did them very well. So this is the last of my mediocre to good category. But from here on out, we're really getting into some excellent books. So my number 6 is Cobra Bargain, the third book in the original Cobra trilogy. Again, this one's also very much falling apart. What makes this book so much better than book 2 is that this book really highlights the generational divide between the original Cobras and the new Cobras. It shows politics in a science fiction world very well, but it keeps the tone of an 80s science fiction novel. Like, this feels like you're reading classic science fiction of the 80s. But it has some unique things with the politics and also with the generational divide of the Cobras that make it really interesting. You have the original Cobra, then you have his son and his granddaughter, and you're seeing how they all interact and relate to each other. And so this was an entertaining book and much better than Cobra Strike. So that's why this is my number 6. Now, getting into my number 5, I just referenced it, was the Icarus Hunt. This is a very entertaining. Of his standalone novels, I think that this is his most well-known and probably his most well-respected among the fan base. I think that this was just fine as a sequel. I didn't need, or as standalone, I didn't need a sequel for this book, the Icarus Plot. I didn't need it, but it was nice to have. And I wanted to support Timothy Zahn any way I could. But this book, again, has some of the puzzle box elements, has a big twist near the end. I didn't love the twist. This is a weird one in that this is a first-person narrative. But it is a super fun puzzle box book that is sci-fi. So I like this book a lot. Now we get into some of his upper echelons. Boy, are these some of the most amazing books I've ever read. Cobra. This was one of the first series of his I read, and this is the first book in the Cobra series. And again, this book's falling apart. I wish they would reissue these modern day, but with these classic covers. The classic covers are brilliant, but because they're so old, they're falling apart, which is so sad because these covers were great. This book was so unique. The way that they introduced this technology into humans in order to fight the not Trollocs, what were they called? The Troughs. The Troughs. It was such a unique concept. And then the way that this book doesn't just show them fighting these Troughs, but it also shows what happens post-war. Now these men have all these digital enhancements, but now they can't be in war, so now they have no purpose in life. What do they do? How do they connect with each other? That's also well done. And then this book has incredibly long chapters. There's only like 6 chapters in the whole book, so each chapter is like 50 pages long. And as a result, each chapter feels like a self-contained novella that is leading you into the next novella that covers a different topic or a different theme or a different idea and concept, which is why this was such an entertaining read. I just loved reading this book. I don't know if I'll read it again because I don't want to ruin my copy. I might go out and get a modern cover of it and just use that as my reading one, and this is my keep to try to, because it's no longer in mint condition, but I don't want to damage the cover anymore. So that's my number 4. My number 4. My number 3 is the first Timothy Zahn novel, non-Star Wars, that I read. It's a standalone that I read, and that's Angelmass. And this book stuck with me. This was one of the first just pure science fiction books that I ever read. I picked it up because I saw it was Timothy Zahn, and boy, I loved the cover. I think this is a great cover. This catches your eye. And this book is a very much a Timothy Zahn novel. The way he writes his female characters are very Timothy Zahn-y. He also has a lot of science elements that I liked in this book. And there's also a political, whereas the politics is in the forefront of Cobra and in the forefront of some of his other books, the politics are way in the background, but they're still present. And so it's a very different way that he writes his science fiction here. And then there's a lot of action and a kind of a semi-romance. It's not exactly a romance that happens. So this is just entertaining science fiction, so some of the best. One of his best standalones. Then I have my favorite series by him outside of Star Wars, and that is his Conquerors series. You have Conquerors Pride, Conquerors Heritage, Conquerors Legacy. This trilogy was a bold step for him to do. It was what I like about Timothy Zahn is he is willing to take risks sometimes, and when he does, I think it really pays off. The first book feels kind of science fiction. You're following this one family as they have different roles. You have a politician in the family. You have a soldier in the family. You have all these kinds of things. And there's a first contact with this alien species. It goes awry. A bunch of humans start dying. And this one family member, one of the Kavanaugh family, gets kidnapped and taken to the alien planet. And so not only is a war starting between the aliens and the humans, but also the Kavanaugh family is trying to get back their family member in this book. And so this book is about that. But then book 2 completely takes you by surprise because book 2 is entirely by the alien perspective on the alien world. It's not from the human prisoner perspective or something. This is entirely the alien perspective. As a result, you feel thrown for a loop. Absolutely thrown for a loop in this book. And it is fresh, it is original, and it is so different that I loved it all. And then book 3 combines the two, and really, it's a bigger book. It's a longer book than he normally writes, but book 3 really puts it all together, makes it big, makes it epic, does the proper conclusion that the series needs. And this is his most cohesive in terms of, hey, each book is a great book. You have originality in all 3, but they still fit together super well. Like, this is just his best series for me. And this is some of his best-selling original work. And I think it's worth it. And that's why I highly enjoyed this trilogy. So that's my number 2. But now we're in my number 1. And you will probably know my number 1 because I reviewed it a couple months ago, and that is Manta's Gift. Boy, was I surprised by this book. I saw the cover and I had never read the back. I had just seen the cover. And I was a little bit afraid that I wouldn't be able to enjoy the book, and so I put it off for a while. But there was a time in the late 90s, early 2000s where Timothy Zahn wrote a lot of standalone novels, and so I had read 2 of them, Icarus Hunt and Angelmass, and loved them both, and this was the 3rd. And I was like, you know what? I'll pick it up, I'll read it, let's see if I enjoy it. I saw it in a used bookstore. I finally read it this summer, and I flew through it. This book is like Avatar, but with manta rays on Jupiter, and oh my, the love story in this book is so tragic and wonderful, and the whole, there's this element of, you have a terrible situation, but you are going to work to make that situation better. The way that this book, the beginning of the book, this human is infused into the manta ray, his body is dissolved, and he becomes a manta ray. It's so bizarre. This is like into that bizarro weird fantasy or science fiction that you would expect, but in reality, it's just entertaining science fiction. And it is a great first contact type book. It's also just a great love story. It's a great science fiction. It's great. There's great action sequences. There's some elements that remind me of Finding Nemo in some ways. It's got everything. This book blew me away, and I said, you are in the upper echelons of all writers, not just science fiction writers, when I read this book. And I really wonder if James Cameron read this book and was influenced by it, because boy, does it feel like Avatar in some places, because this came first. So this is a great book. So that is my ranking of Timothy Zahn's non-Star Wars novels. If you are interested in reading these books, let me know which ones you're interested in. If you've read any of them, what did you think of them? And if you have other novels that I should read by him that you think are some of his other best novels, let me know in the comments section down below. But until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.